Now introducing Frank Schemmel from DataGuard. He will be talking about addressing the privacy paradox, setting consent and preference management into practice. So from a very political stage, Frank, we're now going back to what is needed in practice. That's a very important discussion, and I absolutely love your topic because setting consent and preference management is still something many companies struggle with. So thank you for being here today, and I'm giving the floor to you.
Well, thank you, Rebecca. Thanks for having me again. I think it's the third year in a row. So you're absolutely right. And very important topic, taking into account, the data economy, data sharing economy, or the upcoming Data Governance Act. So yeah, and today I want to show you a little bit, the framework and what you in practice should consider when setting up a consent and preference management, or for the e-privacy folks of us, PIMs, so personal information management. And yeah, I want to guide you through some practical tips, some considerations we took when we set up a respective solution at DataGuard. We have a consent and preference management solution available for our customers, but I don't want to talk about our product, and more about the general framework and topics you need to consider. And if you want to know more about me, please feel free to connect on LinkedIn, or send me a message here over the private chat. And also there's a chance to speak after this session, meet the speaker, I think is the title. So yeah, let's get ready to business. So first of all, it's really important to start discussing how organizations can put mechanisms in place, to automate consent and preference management to improve the privacy user experience. Because as you can see here, that increasing amount of organizations, and 70% back then last year in this Cisco survey, say that they receive significant business benefits from privacy beyond compliance. And it's increasing. As you can see, it was 40% 2 years ago. And we need to address the dark patterns currently used today in privacy, because that turns off users, and it also means a loss of trust. So it's really important to set up consent and preference management right, not only to be compliant, but also to not harm, to not have a reputational damage and loss of trust, and to have a good user experience. And how can organizations achieve that? I mean, first of all, we have to look into the respective principles the GDPR provides. I mean, I said, main goal, aside from others, should be good user experience and building trust. But obviously, it also needs to be lawful and compliant. And the GDPR provides for respective principles. And when we at DataGuard build our consent and preference management solution, we focused on 3 of GDPR's core principles dealing with the privacy paradox. And that's first, as you can see, to process data, personal data, lawfully, fairly, and in a transparent manner. And the second one is to collect it for specified, explicit, and legitimate purposes, and becoming more and more important as we see, having the GDPR more than 3 years now into force, is the principle of accountability. It's the central principle in the GDPR, and it becomes more and more important. So those are the core pillars, and in particular, it's in particular difficult in practice to explain those to the respective and responsible people that need to implement those. And we at DataGuard in particular call the first principle the creepy principle, because if you cannot explain, to your grandma without sounding creepy, how to process data lawfully, fairly, in a transparent manner, then it shouldn't be done. So those are the core pillars. When it comes to consent, I mean, the GDPR clearly outlines how consent should look like. I mean, it's any freely given, specific, informed, and unambiguous indication of the data subject's wishes, by which he or she, by a statement or by a clear affirmative action, signifies agreement to the processing of personal data relating to him or her. And because of the accountability principle, obtaining valid consent got harder, as the burden of proof now requires to demonstrate that as a controller, you have obtained consent in a freely given, in a specific and informed and unambiguous manner. So what we see in practice, and we serve almost 2,000 clients in data privacy, it's hard to do it right. We see so many organizations doing it wrong and struggle with it, with this. And yeah, in practice, it has become almost impossible to provide a meaningful tool of control. I mean, many companies justify processing personal data by getting our consent. I mean, that's in particular in the online field and in the marketing field, the way to go, as it is quite hard to base the processing, for example, on legitimate interest. There's some room for that, but it's limited. And this means almost any website, software, or app we use binds us to extensive TNCs, privacy notices, and cookie policies that we don't find the time to read through. And in particular, ordinary consumers with no legal training or legal background, it's quite hard to understand. And what we often see in practice is that, there are bundles of consent in terms and conditions, and those do not fulfill the requirements of valid consent. If you consider the EDPB guidance on consent, I mean, the EDPB clearly states that blanket acceptance of general terms and conditions cannot be seen as a clear affirmative action to consent to the use of personal data. So what else do we see in practice? I mean, we see consent banners with dozens of individual tick boxes that would destroy the user experience and force us to hit, the accept all button. And that's something you as an organization would not want. At the same time, when we look at the compliance view, a compliance perspective, there's increased enforcement action by the respective regulators. Take, for example, most recent fine of Amazon. It was based on advertising malpractice in the online field, and also Vodafone Italy, the 12.5 million euro fine, because they couldn't prove to have obtained valid and compliant consent. So we see more and more regulators starting enforcement and also investigations. If you take the German ones, and if you listen to Ulrich Kelber's keynote speech yesterday, and closely take a look at the websites of other German regulators, you have noticed that they started investigations in websites and cookies usage. So it also becomes more and more important from a compliance point of view. And also there's, over the past couple of years, a lot of case law emerging. Case law by our federal Supreme Court here in Germany last year in May regarding Planet 49 decision, or the Cookie 2 decision. Almost a year ago in November, we had the CGU decision on Orange Romania, Romanian telecommunications provider, that explicitly dealt with the accountability principle in terms of consent. And we have also more and more decisions here in Germany. To give you an example, a decision by the Higher Administrative Court of the Saarland in February this year that also dealt with the topic of how to obtain valid consent in an online environment. And in particular, that court decision was quite intriguing, because the court there said that it's not only an obligation, but it's a prerequisite for consent to demonstrate that you have obtained it in a compliant way and fashion. So to demonstrate that you have obtained valid consent is, according to this court decision, not only a separate obligation, but it's a prerequisite for having valid consent. And a last thing I wanna touch base here, because we receive a lot of questions here in practice, is also the question, how long does consent last? I mean, that's also a very common question in practice. And obviously, there's no specific time limit in the GDPR for how long consent will last. If you look at the respective guidance is issued by the regulators, by the EDPB, but also by German regulators. They say, how long consent lasts will, in particular, depend on the context, obviously, of the processing, the scope of the original consent, and the expectations of the data subject. So if the processing operations change or evolve considerably or significantly, then the original consent is no longer valid. And if this is the case, then new consent needs to be obtained. And there's guidance by regulators here in Germany that in terms of online marketing, you should renew consent every 2 years. It's based on a court decision pre-GDPR that says that if you don't touch base with your consumers within 17 months after having obtained a consent for marketing, then that consent is no longer valid. So just to give you some indications what you need to be observed in practice. And yeah, finally, You know, the headline of this slot is addressing the privacy paradox. And what is the privacy paradox? I mean, it's all about user experience and, in particular, trust. I mean, the pandemic made people reflect on data usage by the state and governmental institutions, and ultimately also by private organizations, and having them question existing approaches and business models. And people nowadays want to get back control. So that's the figure below. You see in a respective survey that, you know, consumers don't trust organizations to do the right thing with their data. At the same time, we all want personalized experiences. So if you go on Amazon, on Zalando, on eBay, you want to have, if you buy something, maybe other things recommended and proposed, other goods or services that fit your needs. And in order to provide these services, organizations need to collect personal data. So this is the privacy paradox. And obviously, we want the best of both worlds, but organizations need to get the balance right. So as individuals, we want to be empowered to decide which data is under which circumstances used by whom, and gain value in return. And organizations at the same time need to be able to address the privacy paradox, because, well, without data sharing, they will lose out. People will lose out, and eventually and ultimately society as a whole will lose out. So it's quite important that we always keep that in mind. Well, I just want to touch base just for a little bit, and I don't want to bash on AI, because we here at DataGuard use machine learning to some extent as well. But what I want to tell you from a personal experience is, if not done properly, it's dangerous, because it leads to false conclusions and reputational damages, and you lose trust. And calibrating AI is really difficult and complex. And recent Harvard Business Review on accuracy of data, offered by respective data brokers via EdTech, you know, revealed poor quality, in particular as demographic data was concerned. It was really inaccurate. And, you know, use of proper data for an eye and feed it with actual preferences leads to better results. So if you want to pursue this, then you should really be careful what data you're using to feed the AI. And if you allow people to inform the AI with the respective preferences, that obviously leads to a better personalized experience. So what we can see in the market is that consumers demand a privacy-first approach. And the respective Gartner review on data privacy and personal data, they have highlighted that privacy has become a reason for consumers to buy a product in the same way and fashion as organic or fair trade products have driven product sales in the past decade. So what we say our customers, it's the perfect storm. So privacy is the new fair trade for consumers, and we also see, as we also heard in the previous slot and in previous sessions today and yesterday. I mean, new privacy regulations are emerging and pushed globally. So it's the perfect time to set things right. And if you have listened to Peter Fleischer's keynote speaking slot yesterday. I mean, Google, Apple, and Facebook are driving respective initiatives in terms of privacy and giving users back control over their data. And that's important. I mean, if you read the respective Gartner review, by 2023, 65% of the world's population will have its personal information covered under modern privacy regulations from 20% today. And that's a lot. So we have to take this into account. And I mean, what I always tell our customers and clients is obviously not fear and use the fear of fines. I mean, yes, they are increasing and becoming more and more substantial, as we could see in the recent and latest Amazon fine. But what is really dangerous for organizations is the reputational harm and the loss of trust, in particular if you engage in a B2C business. And there is clear evidence about the more organizations inform their consumers how they process their data, the more trust they build. And empower the individual and give them meaningful control over the data is what you need to do in practice. And there are three core pillars you should really take into account. That is obviously transparency, as consent needs to be informed, empowerment, so really give the users a meaningful control, and obviously, as we learned, accountability. And we really need to rebalance power between organizations and consumers they serve, you know, by connecting them and empowering them to make meaningful decisions on how the data could or could not be used. And in this respect, the human-centric approach is what we regard as really key and crucial. So the individual is at the center of the decision-making process. And that not only helps organizations comply with the GDPR and other privacy regulations, but also builds trust and increase the consumer engagement. So as coming to the end of my presentation, I just want to give you a glimpse look how we address this at DataGuard in our solution. So our vision from the very beginning is, and we are a private organization, yes, we have to make money, but our vision is to protect the people behind the data. And what I mentioned yesterday in my networking session already is it's really important to synchronize consent and preferences of consumers across the organization's technologies ecosystem, because what we saw in the past is that there have been individual solutions also built in respective email clients or newsletter distribution programs, but it's really hard if people update their consent, or when it comes to data subject rights, in particular request for erasure. It's quite hard for organizations to keep up with that and to fulfill those if consent is stored across different systems and not managed centrally and with a holistic approach. At the same time, it's also crucial to have the ability to identify where, when, and whose consent and preferences is being collected. I mean, that's addressing the privacy paradox. So in our solution, we make consent capture, retention, and growth part of the customer experience or the user experience. So they know exactly why you need their data and how you will use it. And at the same time, it's a single source of truth. You can integrate it into your CRM or any other system and manage consent and preferences centrally and holistically. So having said this and looking at at the clock. We're almost finished, and I'm really happy to answer your questions if you have any. And obviously, I'm happy. I don't know, Rebecca, whether you distribute the presentation or the slides. If you want them, you can also get in touch with me, and I'm happy to share those. And yeah, say thank you for your attention, and really looking forward to maybe a fruitful discussion.
Thank you so much, Frank. Yes, regarding the presentation, and not only yours, of course, but also all of the presentations from our other speakers, anything that we're allowed to upload, we will also upload on our platform. But absolutely, please feel free to reach out to Frank directly. He's always happy to help and go into more detail, because Frank, you touched upon so many important aspects of consent, not only consent management, but consent as a whole, basically, because it's it's still an issue for practitioners, right? And what I because we are nearly out of time, but we have time for one question. What I would like to go or circle back to was the privacy paradox you mentioned, because I found the studies you presented there on the slide absolutely fascinating, because on the one hand, consumers want the personalized experience. They want to browse through individualized services to find the stuff they are looking for as quickly as they can. But on the other hand, they're not trusting companies to handle their data responsibly, or in a way they really understand. And one aspect you showed there on your last slide was to make the consent mechanism as transparent as possible. But are there maybe other aspects you see that are important to maybe get rid of the privacy paradox? Because it's really strange that we are still talking about it, because it's so omnipresent in practice, basically. Do you have other solutions as well?
I know, right? And obviously, what is also key is, I mean, transparent information. So you need to have your privacy notices or policies up to date, and not only 50 pages if you print it out of mere information, but it should be concise and plain language, as the GDPR prescribes, and also the regulators demand. And we at DataGuard have a privacy policy generator, not only for websites, but for apps, for platforms, for web shops, Facebook fan pages, and so on. So you can automate that, and don't have to build it from scratch. But what also is important, Rebecca, and we had a talk last week, to build trust is, at least here in Germany, but it will be, I think, also spill or spread out across Europe, is our Section 26 Telecommunication, Telemedia, Data Protection Act. So if we have approved and certified PIMs, I think that will definitely increase the trust, and I think that will be one of the big discussions in future when it comes to conference and content and preference management, because we discovered last week that a lot of things are unclear in this respect. So so we all should stay tuned and also follow Bitkom's news in this respect. What will come across the corner? I think that's also key.
Thank you so much, Frank. It's so great to hear you say trust is getting more and more important. Look at the title. So I absolutely agree, not just because it is in my title, but because, as we all know, digitalization and data processing needs trust, and it needs trust from all sides of and all players of the ecosystem. So thank you for putting emphasis on this again, Frank, and thank you so much for your great presentation, for being here today and also yesterday. If you get time, please stay on the platform a bit longer if there are additional questions, or if you want to reach out to other participants today. I hope to see you again soon, Frank. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. Have a lovely day. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye-bye.